Aram Zobian is one of the absolute best exploitative poker players in the world. And he's also an expert at running super deep in gigantic field, live, and online poker tournaments. In 2018, he actually final tabled the World Series of Poker main event, cashing for $1.8 million in the process. So, who's better to bring you 5 key exploits for live poker tournaments than Aram himself? I love Aram's content and I learn a lot from it personally. I'm always focused on bringing you actionable strategies, and in this video, you're about to learn a bunch of them.
Hey guys, this is Aram Zobian for PokerCoaching.com, and this is going to be the last video in this mini series on exploits. So today I'm going to be talking through 5 of my best exploits in spots that come up pretty often. So the first one would be folding close or quote-unquote close spots, including hands that are high up in a range early on in the hand. So flops and turns I'm referring to. And these spots are, I would say, fairly common because we end up with bluff catchers a lot, and we have to decide, are we gonna make it to rivers and then decide, or if we get bet into for a third time, or perhaps are we just gonna let it go early? So to give an example, first one being in a $250 tournament on Bovada. Forgive me if this is a little too small and kind of hard to see, but we're playing a huge ante here. So I just want to mention that there's 3 big blinds in the middle before there's even any action, 2.9. So that's a significant part of this hand. And I go for a 5x raise. Based on this ante size, just wanted to add that in. And this in itself is just not exactly an exploit, but just, being ready to make different kind of plays based on, there's this really small ante, so I have to be tighter, or there's a really huge ante out there, so I want to be larger in my raise sizes and getting after it more. So I go 5x, and our guy calls. We get ace king 8 flopping, good king with no backdoor, and I decide to go for check. My opponent will go ahead and half pot bet right away. And so I'm already in this dilemma of, you see I kind of make the snap call, which in hindsight, I think I can probably just fold at this point, which might sound crazy, but if you think about the less intuitive bluffs, they're going to be hard to come up with. So a hand like 6-7 of diamonds or 7-4 of diamonds, as long as he's still defending all the suited hands, that might be a better flop bet than, let's say, queen 10 or jack 10 or queen jack, just because you're doing a good job of making me fold cards, and you have some backdoor equity of you have a chance to get a big bluff through later with again better cards. It'll just be good to have low cards by the river. But yeah, if you're betting half pot, it's not that enticing to go for a bluff for that size. Whereas if you have an ace, it's a pretty easy play. So I think that also part of it is just we're going to face, I think, a lot of the same kind of aggression. There's a lot of this archetype player where they're just betting half pot and then just piling in money later. Same for the guys who, will raise a 3x preflop, let's say, and then you just kind of get the sense that I'm gonna have to be playing a big pot here because they probably are higher up in their range. So I think this is something that happens as well. Just to talk specifically about that half pot size, is what I've seen throughout the years is this is just mostly value from recreational players. So with all these things in consideration, with sizing, with the board texture not allowing much availability for bluffs and non-intuitive bluffs at that, I think we can just let this go on the flop, and ended up folding turn, which I think is, you just kind of have to at this point. But yeah, let's see. Yep, end up folding here. The next example that I have comes in a $1,000 online event. So I've been playing these bracelets online, which is nice. They're offered on WSOP.com. And our spot here is hijack raising off chip lead of the table, covering everyone behind, opening into a couple of 20 big blind stacks, and I go for a standard flat off 29 big blinds with king queen suited. I'm always playing call with this hand. My 3-bet range is going to be more like king jack offsuit to bluff, ace 10 offsuit, maybe ace 9. So yeah, this one's just way too good to do anything but call. If I had 25 bigs, it would be reasonable to shove, but 29 is just too much. And we're also about 25 players left, which I think is worth noting here. So we flop middle pair with a backdoor, and immediately we face this half pot bet. And now this isn't a recreational player. This is a reg and more of a solid reg at that. But I think that we're facing something of a similar situation here, where we're immediately not looking at that many hands that can actually bluff. So if my opponent had deuces or threes, I think those are some good ones. And then for immediate equity, they really only have, Jack 10, Queen 10, and Queen Jack. And yes, he does have the offsuit combos of these hands, but you also have to consider my range here. And I'm pretty tight to call. So my range is going to be something like ace 7 suited through ace jack suited, some ace 10 and ace jack offsuit, a lot of the broadways, so king queen offsuit, king 10 through king queen suited, queen jack suited, queen 10 suited. And then for pairs, I probably have something like 4s through 9s, 9s being close between just outright shoving and 3-bet calling, I would think. So maybe 4s through 8s, and then maybe like a 10-9 suited. So all in all, I hit this flop with some pretty strong level of connection, just hitting the ace and the king a fair bit with all my hands. And yeah, it's not like I have 7-8 suited here. It's not like I have queen 8 suited. So out of position can't just go piling money into the middle. And so I go for call, which I think, unlike the last one, having a backdoor here, I can't just fold right away. We get the Badoogie turn, the 9 of spades, and he continues on with this half pot bet, telling the story of ace jack plus or perhaps ace 10 plus. And I think it's just going to be way easier to arrive at value than it is before you're starting to choose some more difficult to find bluffs. So yeah, again, you just can't bet that much from out of position here. I think it's going to be something like a, I don't know, 70 or 80% check if you were to look at a solver, if I'm guessing. And he wants to play a polar strategy, I would think, not like small betting too much. I think you want to just start big betting. But yeah, I just don't see the 10-9 of diamonds making a loose stab here before pocket fours or pocket kings does. And it's just so much easier to choose from all your good ace-x, all your 2 pairs, all your sets. And yeah, for me, I still have strong hands. Again, I have pocket fours. I have maybe some ace 4 suited, which I didn't include earlier, but I think I'll mix like the ace 4 and ace 5 between calling. So yeah, I definitely have some strong hands to call down here. My queen is going to block the more relevant bluffs, I would think. So I think this is a reasonable one to just let go. And these spots, I think, just come up quite often, where we're in this dilemma of, not having enough bluffs from our opponent and probably just getting bet into on the river. So it can feel weak at times to fold top pair. Like if I folded ace 7 suited on the turn there, that would definitely be an overfold. And I'm not saying I would do it in this exact spot, but there are plenty of times when I just kind of cut my losses early in hands against weaker players where I know for a fact they're just not bluffing. So being willing to make these plays is going to be a big part of win rate long term, and also folding rivers. Sometimes you just you got to make it to the river with ace 10 there. But if you're facing a triple, it's pretty bleak. So if I double called ace 10 and got there, I'd probably just still fold on the river, not beating value and not seeing many bluffs. So the second example, my second exploit for today, is kind of a trick, so to speak. So it's a play that doesn't happen almost ever at equilibrium, if ever. And it's the tiny bet in position on turns to bluff rivers. So the hand example I would use is, let's say, 50 big blinds effective button versus big blind. And we don't even need a board, but let's just say it's ace, king, 7, 6, deuce. And we bet big on the flop and they call. And then we bet tiny on the turn and they call once again. I'm going to change the board. Actually, I don't like ace, king, 7, deuce enough because people will ace, king, 7, 6, deuce. Not a good enough example. So let's just change that to king, 8, 7, 3, deuce. So in this spot, if we get to the turn and we bet tiny, like 15% of the pot, I think our opponent's way more live to raise their good hands now. So if they just called a king on the flop, now they can raise. And we also just keep their range super wide by doing this. So this is the kind of play that I would do against weak opposition who's not going to call strong enough on the turn, or will just have the tough time calling for a huge bet on the river. And it's a more of a funny play. We'll see a guy like Giraffe Ganger does it as well, where he min bets the turn and then shoves river for whatever, 4x pot, 5x pot. And it's something that myself, I really enjoy doing this because it gets a fold from some players like 90% of the time. So, based on the board and based on how many snap calls people actually have, it becomes extremely difficult to defend for these really big sizes on big SBRs on the river as well. And yeah, it can just end up working out really well. Against, again, certain people, it will backfire, but against others, it just prints. All right, the third exploit would be shoveling in huge bets for value on flops. And we'll jump over to a solver for this hand example. You're using Peak GTO by Poker Coaching. It's actually their software that just dropped, and it looks pretty nice, if I can say so myself. So the hand example I want to use is playing 60 big blinds effective, hero playing as the low jack, raising it up, and the big blind calling. We get 10-8 through rainbow. And you can see right away there's going to be 3 sizes used. There's a little bit of checking going on. I would typically move this just to a pure bet. So the sizes that are used are quarter pot, 2/3 pot, and pot. And we can actually see that pot is the most commonly used size by a decent portion, like used 2 times more than the second most commonly used size here. And so if we think about what happens in the response from the big blind, if we pot, if we were to just consider our value range first and say we have jacks, well, we want to just put in this overbet, I think, pure, and look to get an auto call from all sorts of stuff. First of all, the obvious ones are 10x, right? Out of position is never folding a 10, no matter what. Second would be lower pairs, 8x, 3x. And as long as these hands have a backdoor, they're just also pure continuing. As far as straight draws, some queen 9 is folding, so that one's indifferent, but any gut shot with a backdoor is calling, so 9-6 suited is calling. You're obviously getting the call from the open enders, getting a pure call. Ace 3 can't go folding, 5-3. And then for some high cards, a king, queen, backdoor, ace, queen, ace, jack, backdoor, all have to call some, as well as a little bit of king, jack. So we want to consider what we're getting an auto call from, so to speak. So if you're the type of player who, let's say, moves their entire range into a small bet on the flop, maybe you want to start considering why it could be good to big bet. And this isn't exactly an exploit. We can see it's happening at equilibrium, but I would include it because almost no one actually does this. Until you're playing high stakes, you do see something like quarter pot or third pot to 80% pot, and you very rarely see like 130% pot. And this solve has, it has pot in there, but if you were to include 150% pot as the big size and then keep these two the middle size and the small size, it would still use that 150% pot because it does a really nice job of getting auto calls. And we'll see it even more on some more gapped boards, so to speak, like connected but gapped, like 10-8-5, where it'll happen even more because now there's more availability for pairs and straight draws from out of position. And just quickly to talk about the bluff range, because maybe you say, well, I don't see this working out as well because people fold this right away, or they fold their ace jack, their king queen right away, and they'll fold a three, like they'll just open fold queen three with a backdoor to me, and I'm like, what the heck? I just lost some value. So if that's the case, then we want to consider, is this better as a bluff? If we're having, let's say, the ace two of spades here, or the king nine of hearts, or the king jack offsuit, then if the opposite is true, if people are going to fold too much, you can move your size into an overbet as a bluff. And I think just generally it'll be less of the case. I think this play works out really well for value because, again, there's just so many hands that they're nothing to do but call you. Whereas if you were bluffing, you can still get a fold on, an overfold on later streets. So I think small betting flops and then going from there and getting tons of folds later is also a good option. So yeah, generally this spot will just work out better for value. And yeah, you see it with the 10x as well. You see it with even like a king 8 will pot it right away because you're getting called by all the worst 8x. You're getting called again by king queen with a backdoor and 3x, so on and so forth. So the next one would be having an abundance of sizes on turns and rivers. So kind of touched on this point in my second exploit, which is the tiny bet to just pile in a ridiculous overbet on the river. It's funny to me that we play poker and you go play a $1,000 tournament and you might be 30 big blinds effective and someone bets 3 streets and somehow isn't all in. It'll go something like third pot, half pot, leaving an SPR of 1.5 and then bets for 75% pot. So that's always kind of struck me as a peculiar thing that, a lot of people's strategies isn't predicated on getting all in by the river. And for myself, it was for a long time before I even learned theory. This was the case where I just tried to play for stacks in so many hands. And there can be some downside to doing this. So for example, if I'm shoving rivers for huge sizes instead of having like a block range with some of my very best value, then it stops people from bluffing me and me collecting value from bluffs. So there is some downside to having a ridiculous overbet in some spots, but just the dynamic idea of, if you really want someone to fold and you feel like betting all in for 3 times the pot is going to work way more than betting 130% pot, then I think you better be ready to just go for it and use that size. So having this idea of availability in your mind and just constantly just having the option to do so, there's sort of power in that, and following your instincts and your intuition. Again, if you feel like maybe block will work out better here as a bluff because he thinks I'm going to have way too much value in this line, you go ahead and do that. So each spot is unique, and each player that you go up against is going to have their certain ideas about the games. And the last one I would say is more of a general one. It's just playing super loose preflop, really getting in there, because we have such great opportunities to play with huge SBRs against people. So a quick example I would use is I was playing a 3K at the win and middle position. Some gentleman raised to 2 blinds and I just peeled the 8-7 offsuit on the button. We're 400 big blinds deep, and somehow we get in 400 big blinds on the flop when I flopped the stone nuts on 6-5-4, and the guy had aces and just ended up overplaying his aces. So getting in there, flatting opens with 4-3 suited on the button, or king 3 suited when a chart says, no, that's too loose. Again, having this dynamic idea of how many hands you can play is good because you can end up winning huge pots. Now, I would say there is some, not caution, but you want to just have a sort of a game plan, because if we're getting in there and we're really wide, we're going to end up with a really wide range on the river. So I think running huge bluffs in these kind of situations is not so great for a number of reasons. But there's still going to be spots where, we're smart. We're going to be able to pick up when people are weak, or they're too passive on some boards, like some low boards, and we can just take the pot away from them. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities to make all sorts of plays, whether it's cheap stabs to make a medium or a big bluff on the river because they're capped, or it's just getting a ton of money in on a paired board when we flop low trips and our opponent just puts way too much money in with an overpair. And so, yeah, being willing to just essentially gamble for tiny portions of your stack. Like if we're playing 300 big blinds effective, what's a few big blinds to risk potentially having some huge implied odds? So it can be good. You can also take it too far. I'm not in there flatting Jack 2 suited and King 5 offsuit and all these hands, even though I sometimes would like to. It's more of playing hands that are connected, have good playability, and same goes for, maybe flatting some pairs. If you're supposed to fold deuces versus an early position raise because you have a few people behind you, like if you're hijack, you're playing 75 bigs effective, I also think it's a good spot to just peel and try to flop sets, even though it might be theoretically too tight, or too wide, I should say. And so to wrap things up, just again, as I've probably said a million times in this series, it's just to be dynamic and fluid. Don't be so preset in your strategy. It can be easy to want to go in and have a game plan of, I'm not going to bluff today, I'm going to play solid. But you might just have an amazing spot to bluff. So always be ready, always be dynamic and shifting to what people give you, essentially. Next would be, be fearless but selective. So maybe you learned something cool that you wanted to try out, but you're 10 people left in your mid stack and there's a ton of pressure on you. Maybe that's not the best time for us to try an exploit that we just learned. That being said, we still want to be fearless. We want to be playing with utmost belief in ourselves and confidence. So it's going to be a huge part of having win rate in the games nowadays, is just playing with confidence, playing your own style, and enjoying playing as well. Last would be observant and analytical. So, watching how people are playing and approaching the game. It's of great use. Nowadays, there's too much phone use. There's not enough paying attention, I think. Whereas, you could come up with your own exploits against people. You notice a guy does something very specific that makes you want to do something very specific against him. So yeah, the more that we pay attention, the more that we can build our own strategy and adjust to how the people at our table are playing. Because yeah, it's all about being fluid and not being rigid, taking things as they come, and being present with it. So I hope this was a helpful series. I hope it was enjoyable and coherent and all that good stuff. So thank you so much for watching. And if you have any input, please don't hesitate to share. Cheers.